They may be called the next generation, but they're the church of today. Reach, disciple, and mobilize students to share the hope of the gospel. This is Next Gen on Mission with Shane Pruitt and Paul Wooster.
Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the Next Gen on Mission podcast. My name is Shane Pruitt. I'm the National Next Gen Director for the North American Mission Board, and always with me is my co-host, my brother, Paul Wooster, who is the National Collegiate Director for the North American Mission Board. What's up, Paul?
What's going on, man? Hey, I'm excited about this thing that we're working on called Collegiate Coaching that NAM's putting together. And we're going to be sharing more info about that. But Shane, you just launched last year this youth pastor coaching network. Man, I'd love for you to share with our listeners like a little bit of what God's done.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. We really feel like the heart behind it is that if we want to really move the needle and impacting the next generation, we're going to do that by impacting leaders who are impacting the next generation, because we feel healthy evangelistic leaders are going to lead healthy evangelistic ministries. And so we started a coaching network back in the spring of 2021, and we coached 62 youth leaders, and it was awesome. And that coaching was 4 online sessions, 1 2-day in-person session at the NAM offices in Alpharetta. And then in the fall, we started again, and we've had 325 sign up. We had to cap it out at 325. So it's crazy. It's a coaching network, but it's almost bigger than most youth pastor conferences. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, so we're excited about that. We started, last week compared to this recording. So toward the end of August. And we're just excited to see what God does, man. We talk about all the practical side of ministry, maybe things that we didn't learn in Bible college or seminary, or we did and we've forgotten. So really kind of honing back on the core value, practical side of ministry, man. So I'm excited to launch the collegiate one.
Yeah, man. And I think that in-person gathering where they have those 2 days together, that provides so much just like people encouraging one another and getting to know one another, this movement across the nation. So yeah, that's why we're taking your model of that youth pastor and we're going to do a collegiate coaching network. So I'm super pumped about that.
Absolutely. Man. And if you're listening and you want to find out even more about the youth leader one, and you can even check that out. Maybe you're a collegiate leader, you're a BCM director, a college pastor, but you want to kind of see the model and hear some stories. If you just go to youthleadercoachingnetwork.com, all spelled out. It's really long, Paul, right? So youthleadercoachingnetwork.com. You can read more about it, even watch some video testimonies. And check that out. And then Paul's going to be doing one very similar for collegiate leaders. So we cannot wait for that to happen. Yeah. And so, Paul, speaking of collegiate ministry, man, we got one of the best on with us today, man. I love this brother. Mitch Tidwell is a dear, dear friend of mine. I know he's a dear friend of yours. He's like a young brother to me. Before serving at the North American Mission Board, I served as the director of evangelism for the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. So Mitch served on that team, and he's a brother to me. He oversees the collegiate ministries for the state convention there in Texas, the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. And man, he's one of the best. Even though he impacts Texas, he really has an impact across the nation. And is being used by God mightily. So, Paul, today we're going to talk to Mitch about the strategic impact of university campus and what God is doing on universities and how to impact universities and the campuses there. So, Mitch, welcome to the Next Gen on Mission podcast. Mitchy T in the house. Mitch Tidwell, what's up, brother?
Hey, man, it's good to be with you guys, man. I'm really excited about it. I don't know if I'll get a word in between you and Paul, but I'm just excited to be here in the room, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I love it. Hey, so Paul, Mitch is like, man, he is like the king of roast, dude. He's always roasting me up, man.
We can take it.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, that's how you know I love you, man.
That's right.
If not, I'm like an introvert, but when I start roasting, that means there's love.
Yeah. Hey, and when Mitch roasts, man, he gets personal, Paul. He used to make fun of my ankles. It's bad when somebody makes fun of your ankles. Like, that's real personal.
Hey, man. Hey, we won't even get started on what you started roasting me on. So we'll keep moving, man.
Hey, well, awesome. Mitch, we're so glad you're on, man. And before we get too spiritual, man, tell us one fun fact about Mitchy T that we should probably know that we don't know already. Besides the fact you're like a fantasy football guru, man. You and I play in a league together. We were in the championship game, And then,
Yeah.
Alvin Kamara
Yeah.
decided to have 6 touchdowns in one game, so I didn't have a chance against you. So, man, tell
Yeah.
us a fun fact about yourself.
Well, I was really excited last year. I did win 2 fantasy football championships, but that was my first. Those were my only championships to ever win in like I guess it's probably been like 15 years of fantasy football. So I feel like I'm just getting the hang of it. So I'm really excited about this year. Although for our fantasy draft, I'm going to have to auto draft because I'm going to be on vacation with my bride, and I'll get in some big trouble if I start doing some fantasy draft.
Come on, man. Priorities, man.
Yeah.
Priorities.
So I'm just praying the Holy Spirit will just draft the right team for me. But anyways, probably a fact that I don't think anybody needs to know this about me, but it is always a unique thing. But I did, prior to ministry, I went to culinary school and started a restaurant. So that's those are my pre-ministry. Those are my BC days, basically. So that's what I did. I did like 2 years of community college right out of high school, came away with 9 hours in 2 years, which is, parents are like, all right, let's figure out a different route for you to go, because most people get that in half a semester. And so my dad was a competition barbecue cooker. I did it as a hobby, and he always wanted to open up a barbecue business. So he had a dream and a low-life son, and he said, let's put those two things together. And so that's what happened. I was 20 years old, and my dad financially backed the business, and my mom and dad did, and they said, will you operate it? And I just figured it out. So we opened a business, and so I ran that business till I was 26 or 7. I came out and started doing it part-time at 25 to start doing ministry. And I think 26, 27 is when I full-time left the business and got into ministry full-time. So that's kind of the unique thing about me, I guess.
Wow, you said barbecue, and I literally started salivating. I'm just like,
so, I loved it, man. It was.
We don't really even know what barbecue is out here.
I was about to say, do y'all have barbecue in California, Paul?
Not really, man. I went to a barbecue place, quote unquote, and I asked them for brisket, and they didn't even know what it was. I was like,
heresy. That's heresy.
That's a Texas staple, man.
Exactly.
And this is not what this is for, but when you look at, I love barbecue, because if you look in Texas history, like all these big moments throughout Texas history in the last like 200 years, it all revolves around barbecue. Like you had some of the Germans and the Polish that had come in, especially in Texas, and they had these meat markets, and the meat that they weren't going to use, they smoked so it would, stay longer. And that created, so people started buying barbecue. Well, then it became like a celebratory thing where anytime there was like a celebration, you have barbecue. So like in Texas, when it comes to barbecue, like you never just eat barbecue as a meal. It's not like, hey, we're having spaghetti tonight. It's like if you're having barbecue, it's like, this is a significant moment. Like this is, and we're all happy and we're pumped about it. So I love barbecue because of the fact that it's like, there's always like a joy around it and a celebration around it that's like different than any other meal you would have. So that's kind of why barbecue is so big here in Texas.
Oh, yeah, man, that's cool.
That's true. Hey, Mitch, I remember a couple of years ago when Harvey was coming in, Hurricane Harvey, and actually it was up on my like little Facebook memories the other day. But there was one of the news channels in South Texas was like saying, hey, here's supplies that are needed. So it was like Hurricane Harvey supplies. And then it was like brisket limit 2 per person. It's not like, so Hurricane Harvey, you need generators, water, and brisket. Yeah.
That's true, man. Texas for you. All right, let's jump into the serious questions here. So the first one on our list here is, what do we need to know about Generation Z?
Yeah. Part of it is I work so much with the leaders of those who lead Generation Z, I think a lot of the time that I have and that I do spend with Generation Z, I think one of the biggest things that I have noticed out of them is just the global mindedness of Generation Z. I mean, I was sitting down the other day, I was at me and my wife we were teaching at this singles retreat. This church invited us to come down to the beach in Texas to do this like singles retreat. And it was an international church. So it was like a group of like 20 to 25 people in college and then just post-college, but they were all international. And it was funny to sit there and talk, and maybe this is kind of a different group, but I was so surprised with how they were talking about things on a global level. Even I was doing a camp recently for a church in Fort Worth. We were in Arkansas at a camp, and I sat down with one of the kids, and he was telling me about all this political situation happening in like Libya. I'm like, I barely knew who our president was in high school. I wasn't like worried about what was happening in Libya, but they're so like globally connected that it's really, and I often like kind of think like, I wonder how that really plays out, because I don't think that Gen Z is just thinking about how things affect themselves or even their town or their school, but I think they're thinking about how things affect the world and the globe. And I think that's probably a big deal. Probably one of the big things that I've noticed about them, that it's not just, I think probably in years past that it's been, as we've maybe preached or taught, we really talk about what's best for us or maybe our nation, but they're really thinking what's best for the world. I think that may be a key difference, not just our nation. So there's probably less of and I think there may be even, I don't, this is just me spitballing off the top of my head, but there may even be like a less of a marriage of like kind of nationalism, where it's like, hey, we don't see ourselves as just a nation. We see ourselves as a globe.
Yeah.
With our brothers and sisters over.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think another thing that I have noticed is like, there just seems to be more of a kind of a seriousness to them about their faith in some ways. Like I just see and maybe that's just being young and you're seeing things maybe a little bit more black and white. You're trying to form a view, what's right, what's wrong. But there just seems to be a little bit more of like a seriousness about faith and what's obedience and what's not obedience. And, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything to that or not, but that's just something that I've noticed, is that the students that I minister to at our church, and even the church I'm interim at right now, they just seem to take their faith super serious. Now I'm working with mostly Gen Z college students who aren't made to go to church because mom and dad are telling them to or anything. They're going because they want to. Right. And so maybe that's, a subgroup that's, maybe I'm not getting the whole scope there, but those are a couple of things that I've really noticed that have kind of stuck out to me.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think as the culture is drifting more away from the gospel and away from biblical truth, if you're going to stick with it, you're really going to stick with it. And so I think this generation there may be less people that are following Christ, but the ones that have chosen to do so. And so I think that there may be something there. And so that's an exciting place to be in our discipling, in our training of students. And so, that's awesome. I think in some ways I feel like discipling college students, I've had to almost like say like, hey, you don't have to be this extreme in this area. It's like, sometimes I think there's like a little bit more of extreme of like, hey, like, hold on a second. Like, just because someone is not on this side of the fence as you does not mean they're a bad person. Does not mean they're going to like, let's pull this back a little bit. So there's almost in some cases a lot of extremism where I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. You're like, let's pull this back a second, and obviously not on core things on, the gospel or the scriptures, but some secondary issues. I'm like, hey, let's not tribalize here. Yeah. I mean, I remember that was when I was in high school. It was like burning all your secular music. So I think that every generation has like their version of that, where perhaps it's an overzealous response. But man, I love you, Mitch, and I love how fired up you are about personally knowing Christ and expanding the gospel. So can you share a little bit of your story and how you got so fired up about it all? Yeah.
Man, I real quickly, my family, my mom was a believer. She placed her faith in Christ at a very young age. But my house, growing up, it was honestly a wreck. I had a dad that battled substance abuse, and so if you grow up in one of those homes, that they're just chaotic, a lot of anger, screaming, all kinds of stuff, and so that all that chaos really created a chaotic kid. And so as a kid, I was just very emotionally unstable, angry, all those kind of things. Mom, I get to probably about 4th or 5th grade. Mom tells dad, hey, I'm gonna leave you. We're tired of all of this chaos. And dad just says, hey, I need to get my act together. And my dad, he had a business. He released a lot of that business to do things just himself as a sole proprietor type of guy, and or sole owner in his business with no employees. And we moved, and my dad, I had a friend in elementary school that invited me to church. So I started going to church. My family started going. Dad got saved when I was about 12 or 11 or 12 years old, and things started slowly getting better. We went to middle school. I was involved in church. And then when I went to high school, my parents switched churches, and I'm an introvert. And so, and especially at this age, I was so insecure. I'm like, I don't want to go to a new place, meet new people. In fact, the youth pastor came over to our house and brought a group of kids, and it freaked me out. I said, I will never go to that church. Like, it was the weirdest thing, like, to put me on the spot like that. And it was terrible. And so, and now I look back at it, I'm like, man, I mean, they meant well with that. But it was, as an introvert, I was like, don't want to do this. And so my parents didn't make me go to church. And so high school was just very flesh. Man, I was just into my flesh and got into everything that high school had to offer, parties and, doing all those. You can let your imagination run with that. But that's what I just kind of drank that Kool-Aid and graduated from high school. And that was when I spent the 2 years community college. Man, that didn't really work out for me, as I shared earlier. And that's when my dad said, hey, let's start a business. And so we had a building. We renovated that building. My parents said, hey, I went to culinary school, learned how to cook, learned my way around a kitchen, learned how to manage a kitchen. And then in 2007, we opened up a restaurant, and I was the operator. I was so it was an LLC between me and my mom, my dad, and myself. We owned it, and I was the primary operator. And we were in North Fort Worth, which at this point in time, there wasn't a bunch of suburbs. And so we were like one of the only places to eat within 12 miles. So we actually did really good, because you either had to eat with us or go 12 miles to go eat somewhere else. And so I was like, hey, I'm learning how to be a pit master. I'm learning how to smoke barbecue, but I'm just going to have really good customer service, and I'm going to keep the restaurant really clean. And honestly, that just kept people coming back. And so I always thought we had okay food, because I never quite figured out, how to be a great pit master. But, I think people love the environment. They love the atmosphere. And honestly, you can cook okay barbecue in Texas and get by with it. So that's what I did. And so started that at 20. When I was 21, it was 2008, housing market crashed. My parents were like, hey, you need to get into a house. So I bought a home when I was 21, was able to get enough money for that. So like things were going pretty well for me. I mean, 2021, running a business, owning a business, and then bought my own home. And so I was feeling pretty good. Like I thought, hey, I'm like surpassing peers, and, my house had become party central, and, I felt like life was just going super well for me. But like in the same time, when I'm about the age of 22, like I really began to feel like, okay, I've accomplished some things that I felt like I wasn't going to accomplish for a really long time, like at least until my 30s. And I feel so empty and so purposeless in this. And it was like it was really a big worldview crashing time for me, because I had this kind of phrase, and you guys have heard this a bunch, but follow your heart. And that was like my motto for life, that if you do what you want, you get what you want, then you'll always be satisfied. And what I found out is that didn't work, that I was consuming money. I was consuming business. I was, consuming all these simple habits of alcohol and women and drugs and all these different things. And at the end of it, I was like, I feel worse than when I started. And I thought this was going to like fulfill me. And so at 22 years old, I had an event happen to me that was like I don't know what this podcast is rated, so I won't go into the detail of that, but I had an event happen to me that was like just a really just a come to Jesus moment of like, you can go down this road or you can get your act together. And that's when I had a deacon, a 60-year-old deacon, y'all. He may have been in his late 50s by then, but he would visit my restaurant every week. And man, he'd invite me to church every week. I tear up, because y'all, this is you think about reaching the next generation. This is the everyday deacon in a church who worked for the county. He built roads, and he visited me every week. and was just, I mean, he ate our stuff every week. And I'm like, dude, you're spending way too much money here and the food's not that good. But he just showed up. And,
Wow.
and man, he just kept inviting me to church over and over and over. And finally, we had this local church. It was First Baptist Haslett at the time, in the little town that we lived in. And he said, hey, there's a new pastor. He's in his early 30s. I want you to come here and preach. And so what I agreed to do is I said, okay, this guy comes to my barbecue place all the time and he had a college and career Sunday school class. So I went and attended it, and I attended that for a couple of weeks. And then after a couple of weeks, the pastor, I would try to leave. You had to go through the worship center to leave. And the pastor, I think he was a safety in high school because he took a good angle and he would cut me off before I would hit the door. And I was just like, and I was just felt guilty. I'm like, hey, if this guy's like trying to get me to stay, like I'll at least stay and I'll hear him out. And you know, I don't know if maybe it was just, you know, obviously it was the Holy Spirit's activity in my life, but as I sat and listened to that guy preach, like, man, that guy just preached the gospel like he believed it, like it was real, that Jesus did really want to save people. Jesus did really want to save the world, and he wanted to use me to do it. And that for me, it was just, it just gripped me, because I think the reason why I did well in the barbecue business was because I had been given a task and a vision that I couldn't accomplish in my own power. It was like bigger than myself. And it was like, I just wanted to go and try to conquer it. And what that pastor gave me, a guy named Joe Leiter, what he gave, I felt like me in that church, was he said, I'll give you something much bigger, something much more purposeful than trying to build a business. It's building God's kingdom, and God wants to use me to do it. And so for like a year, I sat underneath that teaching. And then finally, one night, 23 years old, man, I remember this feeling of like, man, I'm going to church, I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying, I'm going through all these things that the church says to do. And that was kind of this subconscious deal I had with God, that I was like, hey, I'll go to church if this is what's going to fulfill me. And I'm like, I'm a pretty type A driven person. So it's like, read the Bible. Okay. You know, like, hey, give me the checklist and I'm going to check it all off, do it really well. And that's what I did. And at the end of that, man, I still felt like something was missing. Like there's a piece of this that I'm not getting. And so it was a big wrestle for me of like, okay, God, I have a feeling that you exist and that you are real, that Jesus is real. He really did rise from the dead. But for some reason, there's this disconnect between you and with me, and I'm not really sure what it is. And I started praying. I asked my mom and a few friends if they would pray to just ask God to reveal that. And I remember one night as we were shutting down a restaurant, I just was washing my hands, and it was like, man, it became so clear to me that the Lord just kind of spoke in his Holy Spirit in my heart, not like audibly, but was like, Mitch, you're doing a lot of good things for me. You're reading your Bible, you're praying, you're doing all this. You just never actually given me your life. I just want you. I don't want your Bible. I don't want your prayers. Just give me you. I want all of you. Wow. And that was like the light bulb moment for me, is that it was like, God didn't want what I could give him. He just wanted me. Like he wanted my whole life in a total surrender. And so that was the light bulb for me of like, oh, that's what's missing. It's like, you know, I was still living in sin, and I was trying to check off the church on the weekend, and I was trying to check off this, but God was like, man, I just want you, man. I just want you. And so I went home that night and got in my closet and just prayed. And I just call it an Isaiah 6 moment, man, where it was like, I just began to confess sin, and I just saw the grotesqueness of my sin and all the things that I'd done. And it was almost like, it was really a holy moment. I mean, other than, it was probably the most holy moment I've ever experienced, other than the birth of my son, where I really experienced it. You know, it was like, I really had a greater sense of what sin is and how gross it is to God and how much he detests it. And I just began to confess sin. It's like, it was almost like God had reminded me of my sin, and I was just like confessing it all. And, but man, in the same moment, man, God also not just showed me my sin, but the grace of Jesus, and how Jesus bore all my sin and all my shame and all my guilt. And he took the complete punishment of everything that I had committed. And he did that for me. And I placed my faith and trust in him, and man, just walked in, and child of the devil, walked out a child of God. And man, honestly, my life's just never been the same. And I never forgot it, man. I just, and I'm thankful that God gave me that moment. I know, you know, God treats everybody differently, but I'm glad he gave me you know, an Isaiah burning bush, road to Damascus moment, because I will not forget it. And it's marked me. It's changed my whole life.
Man, that's awesome, Mitch. Hey, man, thanks for sharing that, man. What a powerful story, testimony. I've heard you share it multiple times, and man, never gets old hearing it. And, you know, God reached you at a very strategic time in your life. So in shifting gears a little bit, man, talk about why reaching the college campus, the university is so strategic. And then in that, man, if you would just briefly, you know, talk about that, and then briefly share about the vision behind Roundup and the Roundup network and what God's doing in that network. Would you share share those with us?
Yeah, man. So, you know, when you look at a college student, just like even myself you know, I know that I didn't go the traditional college route, but even that young, I'll put it this way. When I got saved, that pastor took me under his wing, and what he did is he shaped what it meant to follow Jesus. I was moldable, malleable, shapeable, centerable. I was ready to do whatever he wanted me to do. And those rhythms, and I'm so thankful that Joe was a guy who, man, had a deep devotion to the Lord and loved sharing the gospel with people. And that shaped me for the rest of my life. That was 12 years ago. And those things that he did are still part of my rhythm today. Like those are still part of like how I am as a disciple. And so I think the college campus is so strategic because this is kind of this last phase of life where you can mold and shape a person that will set the trajectory for the rest of their life.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Because once they leave and they get in careers and they get in families, they get in all those things, that things kind of get a little bit more concrete. And this is like this last phase. And I think it's a super strategic phase and one of the shortest ones because they're out from under the networks of parents, of other friends, of other things. And there's more freedom of thought. There's more freedom of what they're going to do with the rest of their life. And so if we can capture them in this moment, like it sets the tone for the rest of their days. And I think that's why it's so strategic. Another reason, especially with campuses with residential population, is there's a lot of density there. There's students in close proximity. You can, you can reach them and it affects more people, you know, I think in that way. So there's, man, moldable, man, you can shape them with the gospel, malleable, you know, and then they're centerable. Like, man, the world is like a canvas, you know, their next, 60 years of their life are a canvas, and we can help kind of paint that and shape that for them with the gospel. So I think that's kind of, I think, the strategicness of reaching college students. And as far as Roundup was, birthed, about almost 6 years ago. We, as I stepped into this role to be Collegiate Associate with the SBTC, we had, a small group of churches, local churches that were doing college ministry. And man, we started it with about five churches and 25 people in a room to think about what would it look like for us to reach Texas college students with the gospel here in Texas. And what we just started doing from there is building really a network and a family of churches that with the same mission to reach college students with the gospel, develop them into leaders, and send them out as kingdom multipliers. And we've kind of kept that as our core values in what we do. And we have seen churches that have really rallied around those three things and want to create community out of it. And so we started that 5 years ago with about 5 churches. And I think this last year, and I'm just speaking from the events, but we probably had about 60 churches involved. Amazing, and, probably 250 plus people. And I think that's going to continue to grow because one thing that I've noticed getting into this is, in Baptist life, traditionally college ministry has always been through campus ministries, which have impacted thousands and thousands of students and really influenced world missions in an incredible way. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing more churches that are saying, hey, we support those campus-based ministries, but we also want to have our own ministry in our church as well to bridge to the campus. And so Roundup has kind of been, I feel like on the front end of like helping resource strictly the local church leader in ministry. And so that's kind of been our niche.
Yeah. And I love how it's growing even beyond Texas. I mean, in your vision, your networks, your relationships, people are driving in and flying in from all over. So it really is like, I don't say this lightly. I really see it as a movement of God that he's doing on these, these campuses and through you, Mitch. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring you on is it's really exciting to just, as NAM and what we're doing, to come alongside you and be a strategic partner with you. And so we just wanted people to know about this Roundup network, and we're really excited about partnering together moving forward. So
thanks, Paul. I appreciate that.
No problem, man. The one of the questions, you kind of alluded to this, but what would you say are some key elements that should be a part of every collegiate ministry, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, first thing is, always, prayer is always the big deal. Like, man, if you're going to start college ministry, it always has to start with a focus on the Lord, not a focus on responsibility, a task or something. It's communion with the Lord and fellowship with him, because so much of, like, we can talk tactics, we can talk strategies, we can talk all those things, but man, if the Lord will birth in you a vision and a conviction, you'll figure out the rest. It's like, if you have a conviction to do something, like, I love my wife. I don't need, well, actually, she would argue, she probably says I probably need some help, but, I love her. So I'll do things to show her I love her, and it's like, and that's the same way I think when it comes to college ministry. If we start with communion with God, he'll birth the dreams, the convictions, the callings, and all those things to do it. So I think that's number one. And then number two, like, don't be passive in your ministry. Like, don't, and I know for some people in churches, the majority of churches, honestly, where, your college ministry may be a Bible study. It may just be like, hey, come and listen to the word, because maybe it's a husband and wife team doing it, or somebody who's like a lay person doing it. But like, how can you be engaging to students? Like, where can you go be where they are at? I think that one of the things that's missing in so many ministries is just a missionary posture. Like, how can I go and be where they are at and be the missionary to them, and not ask them to become the missionary to me, and come walk into a foreign environment, walk into a place that uses different language, that religious language that I'm not familiar with, and be with people that, that act differently than I do. And so I think those are like a few things that, like, pray, man, be a missionary, and then, man, leverage it, develop leaders in your ministry. Like, if you can build a core leadership team that can operate a ministry and run a ministry, like, of college students, and let them have the ministry, like, be student led and like leader supported, that's the way to go. Cause, like, if they own it, they'll do it. Like, they'll go find the people, they'll reach, and then you can help. I always say, like, I tell leaders, like, hey, you're like, let them bowl and you be the bumpers. Like, you just make sure they're going down the right lane. Don't let them get in the gutters, and let them do that. Because I've seen a lot of ministries fail because people will try almost to operate the college ministry like a student ministry, where there's a ton of more oversight and direction. You do need to give vision. You do need to give some direction, but let them give the keys to them, and just kind of put some parameters on it and let them run it. And I actually think you'll see your ministry, flourish and grow, and you'll reach students that you can never reach if you do it that way.
I love that, Mitch. Yeah.
And if you don't pass off that leadership to students, you'll cap out what's possible in your collegiate ministry, because they're adults, and they're looking for real opportunities to serve and all that. So zooming out a little bit on big picture of what are you praying for? What's your vision, big picture, for Roundup, or even just beyond that, college ministries and collegiate ministry across the nation?
Yeah, man. I read, so a couple of years ago, there was a Barna study that talked about the state of pastors. And it said, like, I think in the last 20 years, the average age of a lead pastor has jumped like 10 years. In 94, it was like the average age of a lead pastor was 44. Today, it's like 55. And so it was it was a kind of an alarm for me of saying pastors are getting older, and younger generation is not stepping in to fill that gap to become leaders of the church in the future. And that was a big alarm for me. And I thought, and I was already in this role, but I thought, like, how do we buck that? Like, how do we change that? And I just go back to what we talked about earlier, the college campus, the college students, and where they're at in their stage of life. And I think that's, if we're going to kind of turn the trajectory of some of this, I think that's the best place to start. And, and so what we want to think about is, okay, how do we reach college students is in as healthy as possible, but in the fastest way. And I thought, well, and this was actually what I prayed for when I first got in this position, is like, I felt like the Lord told me, like, the question I kept asking is, what can I do in the next 5 years that will last the next 50 years? Wow. And the thing that the Lord just kept telling me was, focused local church, multiplying local churches.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I have really been working on in the last 6 years is like, who are the churches that are planting, and are they interested in planting in a college context? And so really identifying who those are. So I've been doing that, but then also trying to identify what are the churches that are actually just reaching college students really well. So we want to strengthen established churches, but we also want to help plant new churches in college areas. Because even take a school like Texas A&M in College Station, like 60, 70,000 students, but there's a ton of great churches there. There's no way all those churches are reaching every single one of those students. So there's more room for more churches that reach a different part of the pie. Now, if we're all going towards the same piece of pie, the same type of people, that's one thing. But there's plenty of other pie there for churches to reach. And so I just think we need to plant more churches to reach more students. And again, like if we could plant these churches and we could cast a vision to say, hey, what we're a multiplying church. We make disciples and we multiply churches, and you're doing that with a college student. Well, now what you're doing is you're creating a framework in a college student's brain that says, this is what normal Christianity looks like.
That's right.
And what you're doing is you're setting that forever. And so now they think, hey, if we're not making disciples and planting churches or, multiplying ourselves, are we even doing this right? And I think that's a good thing to do. And so our vision is we'd love to plant, there's 128 colleges and universities in Texas that are 4-year and 2-year. And we'd love to get just gospel reaching churches in each of those, on each of those places. And we already have some, and we just need to identify some of the others that don't. And so we want to just continue to populate those areas with local churches. And so, I would love to see us create church planting hubs here in Texas of churches that are doing that. We've already got several with that vision, several that have planted on college campuses. And we just want to see this continue to kind of proliferate and continue to create multiplying churches who make multiplying disciples.
That's awesome, Mitch. Well, Mitch, man, I love you, dude. Man, as a brother in Christ, I look at you as like a little brother to me. But man, I'm so proud of you, man, and how the Lord has raised you up, man. You're one of the best in the nation. Paul and I deeply respect you. We always want to be involved in what you're doing. And then like, we mentioned before we even jumped in this conversation, Roundup for us at NAM is one of those events we keep on our calendar because we always want a presence there. We always want to support it. We always want people there and involved. So, man, we're so excited about what God's doing through you. So, man, we affirm and celebrate you. And we always love to close out our conversations here on the Next Gen on Mission podcast with the same on mission charge, that the heart behind this podcast is that we would help equip the next generation to realize they're the now generation, not the future of the church, but the church right now, that they have a mission now and a calling on their life now. So Mitch, would you give us one closing thought on that and one practical next step?
Oh man. I feel like, they are, what you do, the way that you're making disciples right now of college students, as I said, it's setting the trajectory of the rest of their life.
Right.
And so is what you're doing now, what would it look like if this was reproduced? And, just think about this, is if how you're making disciples now, how does that affect the church in the next 10, 20, 30 years? Does it look good or not? If it doesn't, maybe we need to recalibrate what we're doing, which honestly really means that we got to focus on ourselves, because I will reproduce who I am. Yeah. And if I'm not doing it, they're not going to do it. And really that starts with you and me saying, hey, am I the kind of disciple that Jesus is called to be? And am I reproducing that in the young person? And as you're doing that, as you're reproducing yourself in young people, just know you don't have to be cool. You don't have to be, you just got to be authentic. Be yourself, share real struggles, and then share people, you want to share the gospel, you want to share your life and help them do that with other people as well. I think it's is kind of simple as that. So that would be my charge. Yeah. And what was the last question you asked?
And just say, one next step, man. Like you say, hey, here's the mindset. Here's one practical next step.
Yeah. I'd say whoever you're hanging with, like, whoever that college student is, just be with them, whether that's saying, hey, our main tool for my family for evangelism discipleship is our kitchen table. Like that's where we invite lost people to. That's where we invite college students to. And there's so much rich things happening around just a meal. And so that's our primary tool. That's our evangelism tool. I know it's hard to reproduce, in mass, but hey, just take your dining room table, invite people to it. And you'd be surprised when you do that, when you show hospitality, how that opens up doors for conversations, to share with lost people, or to even, if you're discipling somebody, it just allows them to open up to you, and you can really challenge them in ways they need to, to learn and grow to be a disciple. And then take them with you, as you're going through our life, just take them with you. It's simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yes, that's so good. Sometimes the most simple things are the most strategic. So I think that is so good, Mitch. So Mitch, we love it. And I think our listeners are going to want to continue to follow you and connect with you. So what are some ways that they can do that?
Yeah. So my personal social media is just at Mitch Tidwell on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think that's all. And then, our collegiate stuff here at the SBTC, at SBTC Collegiate, that's where we post all of our roundup stuff. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and we just kicked off a YouTube channel as well. Nice. So follow us there. We have a Roundup Network Facebook group, although I feel like Facebook's totally I think they're hiding a lot of the groups are not nearly as successful as they used to be. But we have a group, jump in there, and we put all of our resources there. Or you can follow my stuff. I put it there too. But and then Roundup will be May 11th through 13th. We're going to have that in DFW. That'll be in the spring. And so we're really looking forward to that too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And we really want to encourage you, if you're a collegiate leader, to be a part of Roundup. Check it out. You'll be blessed and encouraged to be there, be a part of it, take your team. It is a great, great event. I've been to multiple of them. Paul's been involved as well. We highly, highly recommend it. So Mitch, thank you, dear friend, for being on. And friends, thank you so much for listening to another conversation on the Next Gen on Mission podcast. If you have any questions on reaching the next generation, please email us at evangelism@NAM.net. We'll try to address those on a future podcast. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast and it's helpful for you and your journey in following Jesus or your ministry context, please give us a follow if you're on Spotify, or if you're on a podcast platform that allows ratings. Like Paul always says, give us 5 stars, only 5 stars allowed. No, just 5-star ratings. Hey, share it with your friends and on your social media. And we deeply appreciate you engaging with us. We want you to have a great rest of your day and tell somebody about Jesus.